Wanted to, as I thought about what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to start out by telling you a little bit more about me. Not the bio stuff that you read on my website and not the stuff that you've normally heard of. I wanted you to sort of understand where I'm coming from and what I am trying to bring to the table for this position of delegate in Congress serving Guam. So I grew up on Guam, and one of the benefits of growing up on Guam is we're different. We don't have all the tools readily available to just kind of do things the way everybody else does. And so what that does is it makes people who grow up on Guam and who are part of Guam, I believe, more resourceful, more creative. We take the stone soup approach, right? We don't necessarily have everything, but you figure out how to take what's around you and you get things done in a very different way. And that is a trait that really I learned from Guam and such a part of me, and I brought it with me throughout my career. And throughout my career, I have been a person who, as much as I don't really like talking about myself because it's a little bit embarrassing, but at the same time, I want you to understand the way that I think and the things that go through my mind. So when I started out, I was on an airplane. I came back my first summer from college. Carl Gutierrez was on the same flight. He said, "What are you doing when you get back?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to go get my tan back and then I'm going to hang out with my friends." He said, "No, you're not. You're coming to the legislature on Monday and you're going to start working for Franklin Gutierrez and working in the Transportation Committee." And I was 18 years old. And so I did. I showed up on that Monday and I started doing budget analysis and writing legislation at 18 years old for my first summer job, right? Next summer, I worked for Pilar Lujan. After that, the reason I got into television was because I really enjoyed watching TV. My mom, when I was a baby, always used to put me in my baby chair, turn on CBS Evening News, and I would watch Walter Cronkite. It was like programming for a child, right? And that's the way it is on this, the 17th day of July, 1985, right? And so it just kind of, I didn't even take journalism. It was just her programming in my mind because she'd turn it on, black and white TV. I'd watch the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather. She'd turn it off and put me to bed. So just be careful. Don't do that to your kids because they'll all turn into broadcasters. So, that was just sort of like the unique way that I grew up. My dad was really inventive and creative. My mom was a teacher. They pushed me and they wanted me to learn and do the best and excel at everything that I could possibly excel and then to turn around and use that to do something good in the world. That was always what they wanted me to do. And so when I left, I went to the University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League University, and I came straight back home. And my dad was like, "Really?" Because that was a really expensive degree. Didn't want to go to Wall Street. And I said, "No, I want to come back to Guam." And I took a $24,000 a year job at Guam Cable TV because I love Guam. I wanted to be here. I came home not once, but twice. I came home again 5 years ago, right? After I left and did all of that. But it was the jobs that I want to explain to you that really make me who I am, right? So when I walked into Guam Cable TV, it was my next to the last summer back from college. And I said, "You guys, I'm going to be your summer intern." And at the time, Lee Holmes and those guys said, "We don't have summer interns." And I said, "You do now. You don't have to pay me. I'm your intern." And I was filing slides on the first day. And by the end of the week, I had a camera crew and I was doing my first story. When I went to work for KUAM, we were in Ordot at that little tiny building underneath that tower, right way in the back. And I looked around and I was like, "Oh man, we could completely remake this station." And so the Calvos were great enough. They got that building up in Jericho. And I didn't just completely redo the programming. I designed the whole station, the entire thing. They gave me the drawings. I was like, "Here's what we'll do. We'll put the studios here. We'll put the radio stations here." We were figuring out how to do the backgrounds and everything. And I said, "We got to completely redo the programming." We had morning shows. We had evening shows. I had Buenos. I got Patrick Palomo to write me the music for it. We figured out how to create and do things. And I transformed KUAM into what it is today. When I came back 5 years ago, I went up to KUAM and they brought me back in and they said, "Ginger, it's just like you left it." Except the paint was kind of a little bit more peeled and it just
and they weren't really using the second floor like I used to with that cutaway shot. And so all of these things, when I go into something, I go into it to transform it. I've never taken a job. I've never applied for a job and gone and done my job. And then, I've always had this drive to transform. So when I got to the States, I was working in housing and urban development. I did some other things, but the really big job that I'd had, which is giving me the tools to be able to run for Congress, was the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction. And that wasn't just a job. So what happened was I was working as a consultant for the Pentagon at the time. And 9/11 happened. And on that day, I was in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania at Naval Supply Systems in Guam. And we all were in shock. We went to a conference room. We watched what happened. And I said, I have to be a part of this. I have to do something to defend my country, even though I'm not in the military. I'm sure there's a way that I can do that. And before you knew it, I was working on the TSA websites, and I got a call from my college roommate from Penn. And she said, the Congress has created this Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction. They just wrote the law. They just passed it. The president appointed one guy. He's got no staff. Nobody knows how to create this agency from scratch. And you're the kind of person that I think would love something like this. And so she called me on a Friday. So on that Monday, I met with a whole room full of top Deloitte people. And we started to discuss how were we going to create the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction. So I kept raising my hand. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we, this is what the reports will look like. We could have 3 divisions. We can hire these people. And before you knew it, and I was referring to this binder, which was about 3 inches thick. And so finally, the Deloitte people were like, what is that binder that you keep on referring to? And I said, well, you called me on Friday. So I spent the weekend. I did my research. I tried to figure out what does an IG do? What are the rules? What are the regs? What's going on in Iraq? What would work for the country? How do we do this the right way? I printed them out, highlighted them, tabbed them, and I brought it with me that Monday. And so the Deloitte guys were like, would you mind if we just took a break for a minute and made copies of that? We all had it. I said, no, of course, please do it. So they took it, made copies of it, and we started working with the Special Inspector General as a contractor. And in 1 month, the IG said to me, I want you to be my deputy. I want you to come on. I want you to help me develop this agency so that we can do what we need to do, reporting to the U.S. Congress, holding contractors accountable, reforming U.S. policy when it comes to contingency operation. The types of things we did at the time, we were noticing that the lowest price contracts were what the federal government was always using. And in the case of all of these contingency operations, you were getting terrible work from subcontractors because the cheapest guy is not always the best guy. People have been saying that for years, but it took a war and it took us doing this analysis, 150 people that we hired, in order to really push that change and fundamentally get the federal government to finally start awarding contracts on vest value. Okay, and these are the things that we did. The reports that I did for Congress, I spent 2 years on the ground in Iraq. And then I would go for 2 or 3 months, body armor, literally shot at, missed by rockets. Our IEDs hit our convoys. Bullets hit our helicopters. One of my staff died in a rocket attack right outside the embassy because we were living in trailers. And through all of this, we knew that we had a mission and we had to fundamentally shore up national security, have a credible response to terrorism, and at the same time, change and update the federal policies that were involved in everything that was being done. And so that is a unique moment in time. I mean, sometimes I say, but for the grace of God that I was able to have that job, because that doesn't come along every day. Hey, Ginger, come and create a federal agency from scratch. Here's $35 million a year, go, right? And we did stuff that was revolutionary. I came up with an idea because I didn't want all my staff to be exposed to risk if we didn't have to. I knew we were spending billions of dollars on infrastructure. So I contacted the folks on the spooky side and I said, hey, if we set up a special room and folks with security clearances, can we use classified satellite imagery to check on these programs so that when we were auditing, if we got and we always get the coordinates on it. And we would zoom in with classified satellite and we'd see. And if some contractor said, hey, working on building a prison and it's 50% done, and we'd go into that room and we'd zoom in on the satellite and there was nothing there, then we would mount out our inspectors, put the vests on them and send them into harm's way. But if we zoomed in and it looked like it was about 50% done, then that would be low priority and we'd move on. And that was an idea that I had. There were so many ideas. So I say these things to you because I want you to understand that that experience, right, came from Guam, where you're given a completely blank slate. You're given an opportunity. You figure out how can you do this the best way possible. You're creative. You're resourceful. You make it work. You challenge the norm. You don't think that anything's impossible, because nothing's impossible if you try to do it. And I then came back to Guam 5 years ago. I was teaching U.S. foreign policy at the University of Guam. Those kids for dear life, because as I'm looking at where Guam is today, with the threats that we are facing, which are all serious, and I know the people in this room understand those threats, and the opportunity that is passing us by because we are not taking advantage of those opportunities. And every single day I see in my head, why aren't we doing this? And the challenge that I am having in this election is that my ideas are very different. They're very bold. And I'm sure there's people who don't understand the ideas, don't believe that it can be done, and out of fear or out of comfort and routine, don't understand that Guam can actually do so much more in Washington, D.C. And so what I tried to do is I've written a platform myself, and I have posted that on gingercruz.com, and I've worked together with all sorts of people in Washington, here on Guam, experts from all different walks of life. I've been talking to businesses and groups and organizations and experts and really trying to put down what I think needs to happen. And there's some really big pieces which I think fundamentally change the position of the elected representative to Washington, D.C. First of all, you're one person representing Guam in Washington, D.C. And you don't just represent in the Congress, but in addition to Congress, you could put that pin on and you will go to every single federal agency and you can advocate for the administrative and regulatory change that we need on Guam. And I know we can do that because I was part of the Gutierrez administration when we got the North American Nugget Rate Plan, which was amazing. We got phone bills brought down dramatically because we knew we could do it. And it just seems like nowadays nobody thinks that we can do that anymore. Nobody thinks that we can reach for the big things and really change them. It seems like we're just kind of waiting for Washington to tell us what they're going to do. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, especially in government, where I said, even during COVID, why couldn't we do this? And I went to Ginger, don't do that. Well, why not? Just forget about it. Okay, I tell you what, I'll draft up the letter and make it all ready for you here. Let's just send it. Because what's the worst that can happen? They'll say no, and we'll be in the same position. What's the best that can happen? They'll say yes. Why aren't we trying? Just leave it alone. And when you hear that so many times and you see the needs, the Guam that I see today is not the Guam that I remember in the late 90s. Now, we know all of us have this nostalgia. It's always nicer than we think. But honestly, at that time, things were really starting to turn up. I remember, occasionally we'd sing Leaving on a Jet Plane because some people when you really feel sad, and we'd miss those. And nowadays, almost everyone I talk to has a friend, has a family member who, because of the cost of housing, because they can't find a good enough job, because they got all the skills they needed and then don't have a place to really thrive, because they had cancer and their doctor just left and for 2 months they had nobody to help them get through the treatment, because they have an autistic daughter and they can't afford to stay home and take care of that child and work, and they want to be around their family but literally have no choice because Guam is the only place that doesn't have SSI, and they're going to have to move to the States. And as I'm looking at the island and the challenges that we face, I said the only way that we are going to turn these things around is by doing something dramatic, by literally reaching up and changing the game in order to get these things turned around. And I am not just saying that as rhetoric. I'm not saying that as a political statement. I am saying that because I am standing here, 59 years old. Every single thing I have done in my life, I have tried to do in a transformational way. And I just think that all of the things I was meant to do this, the things that I have learned, I understand the issues that Guam faces. I understand why we face them. I also understand the federal government system very, very well. I know how to navigate it. I understand that, hey, maybe if we make a deal in Guam with one of those contractors that's down in Australia who happens to have a branch of their company in Mississippi, in the home state of the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee and a big donor, that maybe we can get the chairman to ease off and support Guam instead of going against Guam. That's the kind of thinking that's going on in my head because I know the Department of Defense. I know the Department of Commerce. I have worked there. I understand all the inner workings, not only of the military side, but of Office of Secretary of Defense side, which is where all this policy is made. And I'm telling you, I coordinate with them all the time on my current business, which is a defense consulting firm where we're trying to maximize the local content, maximize local subcontracts, right? And I talk with them and they're saying, what does Guam want? Like, you're not being clear in what you want. And then when you turn around and you look at Guam, we are not clearly laying out what our 5-10-year vision is for Washington, D.C. And if we don't, as a community led by Washington, led by the delegate, involve the private sector and the public sector in developing an agenda for what is it we want. Do we really want to pursue self-determination or not? As an island, right? This has to be decided, and then that has to be what we do. Do we really want to be part of the economic growth that is going on between the United States and Asia that's bypassing us? We do. Do we want to be part of the maritime strategy rewrite, which is going to be an incredible opportunity to give us options to maybe redraw the maps of the Pacific and turn Guam into more of a transshipment hub, not just for the American Pacific, but for the entire Pacific? Like, take out the lines that break up New Caledonia, Fiji, American Samoa, Guam. Imagine if a market for Guam transshipment was not just the FSM and Palau and the RMI. Imagine if that market for Guam was the greater Pacific.